All right, welcome back, Art World. We are here coming to you from Tag Gallery in Los Angeles. Across from me, my girl, Miss Art World.
What's up, everybody?
And we have a very special guest, K. Ryan Henisey.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here because I've been binging the episodes. It's my new favorite thing.
You're my new favorite person, so we have a lot in common.
Is that how you say your last name?
Henisey.
Henisey. Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
really just like the cognac for any of our drinkers out there.
Love it.
But spelled completely differently because actually we're not Irish.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Except on St. Patty's.
Turns out we're German, and Ellis Island just botched our name.
Well, there you go.
Damn it, Ellis.
But the fun part is we have this whole family mythology about being super Irish. Yeah, not true.
I love that. You have to commit to it. That is great.
Ryan's amazing. He's an artist.
Thank you.
Ryan and I met when I joined my first crit group with the Los Angeles Art Association. And Ryan was our, what would you say, mediator or?
I think the technical term for 825 is moderators. Crit group moderators.
Ooh, fancy.
Largely because our role is to ensure that the meetings are kind and cohesive.
Well, and they were. I was so impressed with you and the way that you handled everyone's crit and what you had to say about each artist. It was just so, I was super impressed. I have high respect for you as an artist and as a critiquer.
Thank you. I really wanted with my critiques that I led, which I think that was the third one I was part of. I had participated in two, and I think actually that one was concurrent with the second. I did two at one time for half a year.
Oh wow!
It was pretty intense.
Yeah.
But I really wanted one of my groups was really great, and I loved the experience, and the other was good, but there were some prickly parts, right? That made me question, what do I really like this? And it turns out I love it. I just wanted something that was much more like what you would get in a graduate school program, right? And I wanted to echo what I got in literature for art because I didn't have that art foundation, right? And so now I'm building that art foundation later in life so that I have the skills and ability to speak and to participate in the same way that I do with writing and communications. So yeah, I mean, I wanted a groundwork that was nice and kind, but that also was collaborative in we're going to help each other become better artists. We're going to point out the things that might enhance or increase your work. I'm more about additive criticism rather than subtractive criticism.
Yeah.
By and large.
Was I in the prickly group?
No. My not led groups.
Got it.
And in fact,
I was oh no.
No. I've loved all of my groups. I've thought they've been super wonderful. I'm starting my third one now this next month. And in fact, I love crit so much that I'm doing my third 825, the LAAA. That's Los Angeles Art Association for all of you who don't know. They're actively screening for members for those of you who are emerging artists who are interested in showing and becoming members of crit groups. 825 is about $300 a year. It's a great opportunity for artists in Los Angeles. So I'm doing that. I'm leading a small group. There's a handful of us tag artists that are going to do the same format with each other for half of the year as well. And I'm considering after my May show, which we'll talk about later.
Yes.
Shameless plug.
We're all about this. We live for them.
Yes, I know. I listen. The only thing I haven't done is mash the ratings button, which I need to do.
Breaking my heart.
I need to do that one. one.
We brought you a
but
sticker and everything.
I did hit subscribe.
That's
Nice.
Like
that's
right
huge.
away. I
Thank
was
you.
like, this. The first episode, I was like, this is really entertaining and amazing. Listening.
Love it.
But yeah, so 825, great place. Don't know where my thoughts were going.
So I have a question with your crit groups. Are a lot of the members like MFA graduates or BFA? And how do those people who have graduated with a fine arts degree, I would imagine they handle criticism a lot better than someone who doesn't have a formal degree. Can you touch on that at all?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a couple of rules
Okay.
in the crit groups, and I like to keep my rules to a minimum. My early career was in elementary public school education. So, and the general
Very
rule
cool.
there is no more than 5 rules because they're kids and they
Yeah.
can only remember a handful of things. And I find that's true for adults. So,
Lifelong lesson.
Only 5
pretty
rules.
much everything I needed to learn about life, I learned teaching small children. One of my rules is you are not allowed to say, I didn't go to art school.
Okay.
Because that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? What matters is your reaction to the art, how you're reading the art, and the language that you use to express that is the language that's authentic to you. So if you're somebody who has a graduate background, whether that's in fine art, like Miss Art World, or whether that's in literature, like me, or whether that's in engineering or architecture or design, which has been the gamut for those who have been educated in the groups, you have high level diction to talk about art. And then there are those who are self-taught artists who, maybe did a little bit of community college and really don't have any language to talk about art, really don't even have the language to talk about the medium they're working in. They're just really experimenting. But I think both of those perspectives are good, right? Because there's an innocence in those who are experimental and also a bit of creativity that doesn't always exist in those of us that think too much about what we're doing, right? Like there's always this kind of dichotomy between the creative and the analytic. And I find it's a really nice balance to have a range of experiences. And I find that's true in life, right? Like I'd rather work in a room full of people with diverse backgrounds than in a room full of people who look and sound exactly like me. Like if we all sound the same, we're gonna do the same thing, and that's not really gonna help us grow, earn more money, take over the world, like whatever it is that's on our agenda.
Yeah. I think that's incredible, and it's good to know because I always imagined hearing about the crit groups that you were so driven to them because of your experience at Pratt.
Yeah, I was looking for something that I could re-get out of having left the MFA program. I wanted the crit group again because that was so valuable in the program.
It would be hard for someone who hadn't been a part of something like that to initially come in, and I could imagine some artists being fearful of taking the critiques, but it's good to know that it is so open to everyone and all artists.
But I will say leadership plays the moderator plays a big role in it. The group that you're in plays a big role in it. I've had a few conversations with artists who have had very horrible crit experiences for a number of reasons. They had a personally hard crit for their art, which happens, and I've given them, and it's hard to give them as well. Just as much as it's hard to hear things that you don't necessarily want to hear about your work, which I run into myself, right? Like when I do something like the work that's downstairs, which is very gay men, queer, online focus, right? Niche. Your general, 40 plus artist who's not tackling queer issues doesn't necessarily understand what they're looking at or have language to respond to it, or in some ways may think that they're looking at pornography and not art. And, you know, that's a very hard line for a lot of people when it comes to speaking about art, to interacting with art. But I think the really big takeaway is what you've mentioned in previous episodes, is that if you want to grow your own practice, you have to take feedback. And some of it's not going to be great. A lot of it will be, right? And I find that the more you build on feedback that you get and also feedback that you give, the smarter you become. I actually feel that I get more from the crits that aren't about my work than I do from the ones that are. Because it makes me think about art in ways that I might not necessarily have to if I weren't seated in that space. Like you mentioned abstract art a couple of episodes
ago.
and I love you for it because I feel the same way.
Okay,
like I do. And even when I understand the reason behind it, right? And I can point to masters with this, right? Rothko, who the idea is the immersion in color and that spiritual reaction that you're getting from the massiveness of the piece. It still looks like paint to me. I mean, I get it. I get the concept, but I don't necessarily want to live with that. But I do want to live with beautiful things that challenge me to think in other ways, right? And so it's interesting because then when I look at a Pollock, I actually don't find those pleasing, like aesthetically at all. I find them dark, a little bit gray and dismal. And
do you know what Pollock is?
I was getting there. No.
Do you know what a Rothko is?
No.
Okay.
I was gonna let him finish his statement and then be like, so let's break this down.
And there I am on my privilege box. So Pollock's the very famous splatter painter.
Yes. Okay, I have heard.
Yeah. And the when I think about the concept behind it, that he's doing these in the moment throws and that it's about movement and it's about the capture of movement in different ways. Conceptually, I really, really like what he's doing, and it makes me enjoy the work even more, especially when you get to some of the beautiful, massive ones in the museums. But it's only the concept that makes me move into understanding it in an aesthetic way. It's not the actual work itself. And that's generally the reaction I have to abstract works in that style. Right? Because in many ways, I'm an abstract artist. I play with figures and I break them apart, and I'm working in kind of a postmodern queerist, right? I'm thinking about the parts for the whole. I'm breaking things. I'm shattering things. So I'm abstracting the human form.
But then you're bringing it back together.
And to me, art is very story-driven, right? So it's less abstracted than when we get into these concepts of throws or paint or feeling, right? Like the artist is conveying anger through the color red, right? And there are works that are just like, I'm a big block of red to make you feel angry. And it works. That's what they're supposed to do. I'm just not that kind of artist, right? I'm much more of a figurative, literal, even though I like to work in a very, very queerist, postmodern driven way, right? And again, that's privilege box right there. And I'll throw out some names like Derrida and Foucault. And we just lost all of the audience.
We could post them.
It's a journey.
These are our big postmodern and queer theory thinkers from the last century. So philosophers.
Cool. Yeah.
But I very much like to ground my work and the way I think about work in those things that mattered to me. And the things that really matter to me are mythology, queering, queer theory, and how we reconstructed ourselves in a postmodern world, right? And postmodernism is about the meaninglessness of existence. It's the idea that things don't necessarily represent or are what they say they are. So we have a door, and a door is a physical thing that exists over here, but a door is also the word that is echoing out of my mouth. A door is also the written language for the word door. A door is also that symbol that we see everywhere that shows us that we can exit out with the green sign, right? So postmodernist says all of these things are the same thing at one time, and they are all meaningless, right? And so how did we reconstruct ourselves back after that? And I think there's something really special about the very specific queer experiences that exist today that forces you to live in a postmodern way. You have to reconstruct your broken parts. Because I had to stop being part of the mainstream culture in order to be part of who I am, right? Had to break in order to reform. And that's kind of why the figures, right, that I work with now are all broken and patterned, part for the whole.
I love that so much.
But so I want to go more into your artwork, but before we do, you said you had 5 rules in critiques.
Oh, and I had 5 rules in public ed for little kids. Really, the essential rules for critiques are nothing is interesting, so don't say that. Okay. Rule number 1, nothing. If you really, it's interesting. That is the cop-out answer. Never say it in an art space.
This is good. Conceptually.
Much better. And then, if you can work in the Italian there for the way that light blinks off of a form, go ahead and do that.
The chiaroscuro.
Well played.
Thank you. Her parents made me practice it for like 20 minutes before we went to his show. Nice. And her dad's like, are you going to use it yet? Are you going to use it? And I was like, not yet.
That's a reference to episode 6 for all of you listening. Seriously, my favorite thing.
So great. So no, don't say something's interesting.
Oh yes, don't say something's interesting. And then the second rule, which I think is the most important, is it doesn't matter whether you went to art school, so you don't need to tell us.
Okay.
And those are really the big takeaways. Another really high up there kind of thing that you always want to think about in the critique is what you pointed out in the last few episodes. Is that you have to sandwich.
Yeah. The compliment sandwich. My fave.
It is all about say something nice, say something critical, but and critically positive, right? Yeah. Saying I don't like it is not like that's against the rules. It must have some value. If you're going to provide criticism. And so what I always say in our initial meeting is that if you don't like something, before you get to the point where you're expressing that to us, you have to answer this question yourself. Why don't I like it? And once you can answer that, then you can start to criticize. A great example is, say you... form is always something that I fall back on, right? And it's always, for me, it's the easiest thing to talk about first because form is what's actually there, right? So I can talk about the quality of the line. I can talk about the hue, the color, the shading, the tonality. I can talk about dimensionality. Those are all physical pieces of an artwork. That are actually represented. I can talk about, for performance art, I can talk about movement, I can talk about sound, I can talk about the appearance, right? The costuming, all of these things are the formal aspects before I even get to the reactive parts, right? And that's where I like to start because I find that if there's a problem with form, that's where there's a problem with reaction, right? If you're trying to represent the moon, but it looks like a block of cheese, right? People aren't going to understand that you're representing something romantic and glowing. They're going to think about mice and cheese.
That's a great way to put it.
Right?
Yeah.
It's really like the form, what is there, is essential to understanding really your own reaction to the piece. And so it's just a place I like to start from. This is literature training. Like I had a very, so I went to Cal State Bakersfield.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
No way.
I did not know that. Wait, when did you go?
Well, I went to the satellite campus in Lancaster.
Okay.
I actually only attended one symposium on the main campus in Bakersfield, and then I went once to take my my final exam.
Oh my gosh.
And those were the only 2 times that I actually went to the main campus. Interestingly, I had a very tough, robust, tight, and very, very rich education in my department. I think there were about 30 of us over both campuses. We all were pretty close with each other, and for the most part had very great professors who had high expectations on discipline for us. Most of my peers now are Ivy Leaguers, and they're constantly like, how do you know all this stuff, or how do you remember these things? And it really just goes to that very tight small group education model, which
and that was
behooved
literature?
me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did my my undergrad and my grad there, and really the MA program for literature was superb. Really, really great teachers.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's incredible.
And also I just since I'm down this segue, you all have talked about how creativity is really essential for what people are looking for in the workplace right now. And as we think about automation in a real world aspect, it's the one thing automation can't do is creativity. And I have a very nice, cool position for a major corporation. I have this whole giant career over here, and the thing that drives that is my creativity, and I put my art forward in job interviews. I like my writing sample to get into my previous job before the role I'm in now was my artist statement for a piece of work.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's what made me stand out.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
amazing. Yeah, definitely.
Well, especially among resume after resume after resume to see this passionate statement.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
how can you not stand out
with
to
a piece of really powerful artwork?
Powerful
with it, right?
artwork,
Like
yeah.
artwork, then this,
Boom.
1,500 word artist statement
Yeah.
on the impact of it. I was like, I'm going to choose something super impactful instead of something that was just like a work process.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Same.
I love that so much.
Absolutely.
So when you were going to school for literature, were you thinking you wanted to be a writer or?
Growing up, the question was always, Ryan, what do you want to be? And I always wanted to be an artist. But my family's expectations were that I either had to define how I could use an art degree in a very practical, real-world way, or and teaching art was not acceptable because that was too competitive of a field, which you all talked about too.
What did your parents do?
My parents owned their own businesses. My mom was a draftsman while I was growing up, which is, she drew the plans for houses.
Okay.
And then my dad still owns and operates his own business. He's an electrical contractor, mostly does commercial work, billboard signs, big event shows, that type of thing.
Very cool.
But my grandparents all have degrees. So my parents skipped the degrees and did more trades work and found a lot of joy in that. And entrepreneurism. But I always had an expectation that I'd go to college. On my mom's side of the family, I'm the oldest of all the kids from my generation. So there was never a question. It was, you'll go to college, you'll have an advanced degree, you're going to get a real career, So, and an art degree was not considered appropriate. The interesting thing, right, is how is literature appropriate?
Yeah. You can imagine there's some similar questions to be asked at the end of that degree.
But the thing with a literature degree is that it's really salable. There are a lot of career fields that you can move into with a degree in literature, and in fact, since the time I've been in grad school, a degree in literature has been in the top 10 most desired degrees, which is actually ranked by the jobs that are given, right?
Wow.
Over the year. So it's been highly ranked at least 3 years since I've graduated high school in the top 10.
It's so interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was a much more salable degree, because with it I could say, well, I can do this. I can go and teach elementary school. I can go and teach high school. I can go and teach at a community college. So I have 3 levels of teaching, and they're not competitive as art, right? Because you always need an English teacher, always. The other side of it is in corporate world, everything is run by internal communications, right? If you don't have somebody who's actually drafting the memos that go out to everyone, you've got some pretty janky memos.
So where do you fall in the Oxford comma?
Indeed. It's essential, by the way. Legally essential. And then there were other avenues that you could follow as well. Like it segues itself well to library studies. So with a little bit more education, I could easily have transitioned in that direction. It's highly sought after in technical fields. A lot of my peerage went to go work for aerospace.
Wow.
And they make tons of money managing contracts because they
Makes
understand
sense.
language.
Yeah.
And in fact, the way I transitioned out of education is I used the local union as a springboard to really beef up my communications and public relations skills. And I transferred that then into a job working for a small startup company, which was a really great experience. And then transitioned from that small startup into a major household brand.
Wow.
And really it all ties back to understanding the degree that I had, right? Understanding the tools that I had in my belt, and then applying the creative want and drive that really feeds me. And so I went from teaching, which I thought was going to be a very constantly creative experience, and instead becomes a kind of cyclical, at least for me it did. Whereas now I work full-time on imagery and content, right? So like I go to work and I work in a creative way, and I come home and I get to express myself in a creative way as well. And it's just like this constantly feeding loop of inspiration, right?
It's amazing. Yeah.
But it's a different type of creativity, which I think is nice.
Where you don't get burnt out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice to think that I can make money in various creative ways. I can be successful in various creative ways. And I find that the skills in one place really echo over into the other. So for me, understanding that watercolor takes layering and patience applies to understanding that bureaucracy inside of a large organization takes layering and patience.
That's quite the tie-in.
But in the same way, the organizational skills that I use in the corporate sector, and I say this to all artists and all emerging artists, this is really important to understand. If you can take organizational skills to your practice and to how you present yourself, you are in the top 10% of all practicing artists today. Right? So basically, the number one reason, I mean, I'm going to laud myself a little and say I have some nice technical skills and I make some cool artwork and people respond well to it. So I'll say I make good art, which helps.
Definitely you do.
But what really gets me into shows, what makes me successful as an artist above other artists, right? Because everybody really makes pretty cool stuff when you stop and think about it. What makes me stand out is that I can talk about it, I can write about it, I can fill out a form on time. I understand that there's a budget for fees, and when I reach my budget, I'm done submitting fees for the month. And when you're a beginning artist and you can afford $25 a month, then maybe you only apply every other month to one show. And when you're a little more established and your budget expands to a couple $100 a month, I don't want to think about it, you apply to a lot more shows. Yeah. And you start thinking about how you'll exhibit differently. For me, becoming a member artist here at TAG, it's a financial and a time commitment. We're a cooperative. We work together. You're buying into the ownership of a gallery, right? I'm one part of what makes this space here run, and there's a responsibility that goes with that. So I try to keep that in perspective. And when I moved my budgeting in that direction, I cut a little bit from my budgeting for show calls. Mm-hmm. But in the converse side, I get a solo show here every year, and I get a piece of work in the group show every month. So I'm guaranteed the exhibition of at least one artwork in my buy-in for this space. Again, it's that organization, it's budgeting, it's taking all these analytic, boring real world skills.
You're running a small business.
You really are.
Absolutely.
By yourself. Absolutely. Yes. By yourself, which, by the way, you need to get your tax ID. You need to either get an annual insurance or pay when you have an event. Again, work what's in your budget. And these aren't great big fees. But if you're really trying to be serious about your art and making money with your art, or even just keeping it legal, right? The important thing is to really follow those rules, understand where you fit, and make sure that your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and really just fill out the form on time. Top 10%.
Well, I just think I know we have talked in the past about the hierarchy of arts, mm-hmm. and I don't know, where do musicians fall? Bottom?
I don't know.
I don't know. Anyway, but I've commissioned artists before for events and musicians. But if they can't give me a W-9 on time, they're not getting the job.
Right.
I need a contract.
Literally how you get paid.
It's how you get, all I want to do is pay you. Yeah. And if you can't do that, I'm not going to hire you again. And it's amazing how many people won't send it in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, don't you want money?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't look good. And I mean, everyone's so interconnected these days. And there's so many people out there. Yeah. That's just be organized and...
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I hear a lot about, especially from new artists and emerging artists, is how difficult the fee structure is for them. And I'll give, it's expensive to be an artist. This is, even if you are in the fair market, you're still talking about a luxury item. Yes. This is a optional, non-essential, just makes life prettier.
It's true.
Item. And so, I don't think it's on anyone to take ownership of how others should spend their money. But it is fair to think about how you spend your own money, right? And how you're going to work with your own money. And I think that understanding that galleries have to do that too, right? They are businesses, and part of the way that galleries stay afloat and make money is to do an artist call. And those fees are big money makers for the galleries. Not money makers in they're going home with these big fat profits. They're money makers in they get to run. Right? They get to be a space that art exists.
You get to have a show.
Right? And it's really great on both ends, because if you're an artist and you're listing show credits, you're just gaining more and more experience, and people are going to take you more seriously. I'm going to break my own rule here. I didn't go to art school. So I had no connections when I was starting.
That was rule number one.
I know.
But art has no rules, from what I've heard. So.
Well, okay, so this, I love that you said it, because this is one of my favorite things, because I actually totally disagree with you guys on this. I think
I love that you disagree with us.
That's what's fun.
Give us it.
So I feel that art is defined by its rules, right?
I agree with you too.
I feel that rules and constrictions are what make art challenge us, right? When a photographer says, "I'm only going to show you things in black and white," they're making a choice to limit themselves, right? And when the artist creates the rules, or when society creates a rule and you find a way to still project your meaning within that structure, to me, that's fine art, right?
Yeah.
When art affects culture, right? When it responds to the human experience, to me, those are the finest of fine arts, right? And that's what makes some theater supreme, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes the best picture, right? For movies. That's what defines a great master for a painter, or the master ballerina or the master choreographer. I think that the word fine throws us off a lot, because it creates this idea that fine art then is the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
When really, if we define art as and not everyone will agree with me on this, and they shouldn't. But when you define art as capturing the essence of a fragment of the human experience, right? When it becomes a cathartic element, when it tells the story of why we exist, that's, to me, that's what we want to hit.
It's so interesting, and when we've talked about art having no rules, it's very interesting when the artist starts making their own rules, because I have my rules that I cannot break, but I'm the one that has given me those rules. And so I agree with you that but then creativity, like, you should be able to explore enough without rules to make your own rules. I don't know. It's lovely.
And I'm torn, because honestly, as the novice innocent person here, all I have heard are rules. like there's a hierarchy. This gallery space isn't classic. I asked someone the other day, what makes this bad art? It's been done before. And I'm like,
Wait, I wrote it down because I wanted to make sure I hit it. So this is very close to what we had in grad school, right? But to me, and when we talk about the featured artist later, he really hits this for me in all places. In order to be meaningful, right? Art has to be clear, unique, concise, and argumentative, right?
rules.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
Right? Totally. But it's those rules where artists find success, right? And
absolutely.
So when I first started both doing the critique groups and going to individual crits, so I would pay experts, right, to look at my work and to give me feedback on my work. A lot of my early feedback, first 2 years, was beautiful, technical, great, wonderful, pick a path. Right? And I was like, why do I have to pick a path? I'm an artist. I shouldn't have any rules. I can do all of these things. Like, why do I have to be limited to watercolor if I can also paint with acrylics, if I'm also a collage artist, if I'm also doing sculpture and assemblage and blah, blah, blah. Well, the reality is, in order for a gallery to understand you, in order for a collector to understand you, in order really for any audience to understand you, you have to be really, really clear and concise with your overall artistic voice, right? And so rather, like, my trick is, well, fine, I'm gonna play with all my mediums, right?
Yeah.
And it's totally my trick. I'm gonna play across all these different mediums, but I'm gonna do the same type of form, right? That's
So
my
smart,
play.
yeah.
Because I get a little bored. I don't want to paint every week. I want to I want to cut paper.
Yeah.
I want to glue and spend hours sticking gold foil down because, like Andrew, I'm crazy.
Yeah. What's the fun thing about graphite? I love it.
So yeah, I think that an artist has to define for themselves how they fit within the rules and parameters, but you have to be aware of those rules and parameters. And they're different for different spaces, right? My goal as an artist is I want to be in exhibitions. I want to be in museums. Those are the type of shows that I aim for. They're the type of shows that I put in for. Major institution exhibits. That's really the level that I shoot at. And for those of you who are emerging artists, that means that you're going into things at a price point of like $50, sometimes $75 for a show entry point, right? These are high-level institutions, and they want high-level artists, and part of their process to weed out and narrow down the competition that they're going to receive is to up that entry price. And it just shows your level of commitment. If you're willing to sacrifice $75 to be in the Smithsonian for a month, that's a decision you have to make. And I would say that that's probably a $75 well spent, even if you don't get in. Mm-hmm. Because that juror looked at your work.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Even if you're not picked, somebody with a big name saw your piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hard sell. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
It really is.
This is
Very
fascinating.
expensive.
I had no idea you could apply to be in like the Smithsonian.
When they do calls like that,
Okay.
yeah, for sure.
That's incredible.
The last big one I saw was a few years ago, and it was when they were trying to decide who would become the portrait artist for the president. And so that call was for portrait artists. Many people submitted. The portraits then became an exhibit in the Smithsonian Museum. And the winners, of course, are the ones who were chosen to do Obama and Michelle.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
This is why Tyler put me on a budget.
Yes.
Because I could justify any call. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
this
Well.
call is very important. I must enter
Yes.
my pieces.
Yeah.
But they can be very expensive.
Very
and
expensive.
you can not get into
Yeah.
some of them.
And then it gets even more dangerous because there are really important calls that are international, that are expensive. So $75, $100,
Yeah.
$125 entry fees. And then if you get it, you have to ship your artwork to Japan
Yeah.
Yes.
or Italy or Norway.
I did mine.
And that's at your cost.
Yeah.
Yes. I did,
And you have to prepay shipping return.
Yeah.
I did one for like Pennsylvania. It was
Yeah.
a random gallery, and it was $400
Mm-hmm.
one way, $400 back.
That's
Yeah.
insane.
So expensive.
You could have flown it out there.
I should have just
Yeah. Gone for a
walked
little
away.
trip.
Yeah.
Carry on?
When I look at, and I've really kept myself limited to California.
Mm-hmm.
When I've had things that have exhibited out of state, they've all been prints. And generally the institution has reprinted them. It's just not, I don't answer calls out of state
Okay.
at this point. Largely because it's just not within my budget structure. And that's defined for
Yeah.
me. However, right? I get to reevaluate, and I have a nice career, and I've been reevaluating. And in the future, I have a bit much in my plate this year. But in the future, I will be looking at solo show opportunities around the United States. And the way I'm looking at budgeting that is that I will U-Haul my artworks myself.
Absolutely.
And I think that cost point will end up being the same cost point as shipping.
Yeah.
But for me, it's going to be limited to solo show or a full room exhibit, not a single artwork exhibit.
Okay.
Because you have a series that you
Absolutely.
have developed that is meant to be together.
Yes.
And I think a lot of artists, they have to wait until they get to that point, because it takes a lot of development to make a series that is strong enough to be to have a solo show.
Totally. And I'll say I'm super prolific. I make a lot of art. I don't show half of what I make. And there have been times where I've spent a month on a piece and I step back from it and say, yep, that's being rolled up and no one's ever going to see it, and we're going to do it again because it's wrong. There's a lot of failure in art. Thick skin.
Yeah.
But really it's a learning experience too, right? When you can be really critical about your own work, right? And you can step back from it and say, you know what, this really is not representative of me. This is not representative of what I want to say, right? And you can fold something up or you can throw it away, right? Super powerful. Or you can even, like the story you told about the boy who ripped up his paintings after his bad critique, right? Horrible, devastating in the moment.
Yeah.
I love that he reformed it into something else, right? Work
Yeah.
through that.
It was
really
on the
work
wall.
through it.
Yeah.
And you have to, like my big piece from my solo show last September, huge, beautiful. It's like 93 inches long, right? I spent 6 weeks on that. It's the longest I've ever spent on a single piece of work. I worked on it every day. And when you get about a third way through something that size, you've reached the point of no return. So you're literally at the don't fuck it up moment.
Yeah.
And yikes, right? So I spent like 4 weeks in utter turmoil that I was going to ruin this piece. Framed it immediately. And you know, it was when I made it, there's a whole piece that precursor piece to it that you'll never see. No one else will ever see. I don't know why I'm keeping it, because it does not bring me joy. I need to Marie Kondo that out of my life. But it did inform that really, and that masterwork it gets a lot of interest from people, especially interest from those people trying to scam me out of my own money. It's, you know, it's big and it's a high price point, so it's a good scam spot. But you know, I know how to spot those guys too. But yeah.
Awesome.
So we're 48 minutes into this
Woo!
podcast.
We have so many things
we
I
have
want to
not
hit.
even touched on your artwork.
Wait, but before we get into the artwork, we lightly touched on tag.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And can we dive into that a little
Yeah,
bit more? Because
we
this
can
is a
totally dive
really
into
unique
it.
gallery space, and
you
have a big position.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
So-
Today, in fact, and it has not been announced yet to the general membership, but it will be soon. But I don't think
Do you want us to hold off on
No,
that?
no.
Okay.
I don't think that's a big deal. But when the current president finishes her term, which she plans to finish soon, I will become co-president with another artist, Tom Wheeler, who's a wonderful photographer and member artist for TAG, which is, quite a big role.
Incredible.
And I'm excited
Congratulations.
for it. Thank you. And yeah, we're an interesting entity in ourselves. We're a really old organization, over 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, which is kind of incredible to think about.
That's amazing. Really?
Yeah.
Yes. There are 40 member artists capped. We currently have 3 positions open. They have to be applied for. You're voted on by the entire membership. Membership dues are about $3,000. and that largely goes to operational costs for keeping the gallery open and running. Although that's a big part of our budget, sales and events make up the other large part of our budget. So we are a selling gallery. We do budget a good amount in sales monthly. And that goes up and down like everybody. So we'll have months with we've had months with upwards of $20,000-$30,000 in sales, and then you have months where you don't. But we do move artwork. I find that understanding the audience is a big part in galleryship, and being an artist in a specific place, right? And there's been a little bit of a transition between the Santa Monica audience that the gallery used to have 3 years ago and the Miracle Mile audience that they have now. But I'd say we see a lot of good movement in the $250 to $750 price point for art, but we'll see things move. We've moved pieces that are over $10,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's an interesting space. We have very serious, established, gallery represented, MFA level artists, to self-taught emerging artists. One of our artists on display right now, this is his first solo show ever. My solo show in September was my first solo show. Was here. So even though I have a laundry list of exhibitions.
It blows my mind that was your first solo show.
Yeah. And really I'll say that my tag show is what got me my Los Angeles Art Association show.
Wow.
Because my submission material was my tag show.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Literally was my tag show. All 10 pieces.
Yeah. Here you go.
And then a description of the show that I wanted to do, which is close to what I'm going to display. But yeah, no, it's tag's a really interesting thing. The membership plays a big part in the direction of the gallery. Sales is not our mission. We're not art dealers, but that's part of our non-profit structure. And we in fact work in the nonprofit world in a very niche area there as well. So we're not like a 501c3, for instance, which is the most common. We're if I remember it correctly, a non-profit mutual benefit organization. It is a very, very niche area of the nonprofit sector. And basically it allows us to have 40 owners of a business that can quit their ownership at any time without causing all of the hoopla that you would need if you had an LLC, for instance. But it also means that we have to operate under some nonprofit guidelines, right? So we have different taxations if we do have an end of the year profit, which is fine, and there's nothing wrong with that, and we're good citizens and pay our taxes, as all artists should. But yeah, the artists vote on everything. Each artist gets a solo show over the course of the year. The membership is decided by the membership. Literally send me a DM, email me. I will hook you up
Slide
with the membership committee if you're interested. The dues are $3,000 a year, and then there's a $200 recurring hold, so it's $3,200 for active members. It's $3,500 if you're a first year member for a $500 deposit that first year. But yeah,
it's so cool because it's just such a true art gallery for artists, run by artists, curated by artists. It's incredible. Yeah,
and it's interesting. We've been going through the organization itself has been going through a very lax period in rules. There are rules that exist. They're written out. We have bylaws. We have things that govern us, and we've been a little relaxed about it, which is fine. You know, I tend to like rules. And my thing about the rules is they're there because they mutually benefit all of us. And if you want to break the rules, I'm fine with that. But you need a very good reason, and not just to defend your stance, right? But you need a reason so that the rest of us can defend your stance too. Our gallery manager needs to be able to articulate the reason that you hung so many pieces close together on the wall. Is there a reason they're so close together, right? Because if there's not, well, then I'd say you're better off with a little bit more breathing space, because less in some instances is more. So, you know, some rules are good for you. I find that if you have 40 pieces on the wall, it's hard to see everything, right? But if you take those 40 pieces and you distill them down to 10, oh, well, now we get something that's concise. Yeah. And you know that's one of my buzzwords.
So do the artists hang their own shows?
Yes, or they hire someone to hang their shows for them. But yes, the artists, they're responsible for the curation and the hanging of their own shows.
Okay.
Awesome.
Right, and it makes for some very interesting exhibitions. Yeah. And you have things, so like my September show last year was super formal, right? Everything was a minimum distance apart from each other. Everything was very professionally framed, right? Like, and the frames themselves spoke to each other in the same way that the artwork spoke to each other, right? So you'd have echoes of one style from across the room to the other. Whereas another artist in the same exhibition used a very standard flat frame with a black mat, right? Very different and very not... Right? Like mine looks like a museum room. Yeah. But it does. I mean, like, that's literally what I'm going... Like, because I'm shooting to be exhibited in museums, I am creating works that look like they belong in museums.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's not every artist's goal. Yeah. And part of understanding that is understanding that you may be next to someone who doesn't necessarily match you. We're trying, as a group, to be better about... working with each other on cohesiveness, but sometimes that doesn't always work out. And if you're an artist who really has something you want to say that's in its own vein, we don't want to step on your toes, but you better be able to defend yourself. Because I mean, we do get attention, right? We get reviews. Not every show gets reviews, but shows do get reviews. We're talked about. We're an interesting gallery because, you know, I hear the hoopla from everybody. And so in many regards, we're taken seriously because we're this old entity. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're a proven, we have an operational budget and it's pretty hardy, and we move art. Yeah. And we manage to keep 35 to 40 artists, you know, happy each year. So that's something to be said. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we have artists that are showing things that are not quite up to discipline, right? So there's this, is it a formal gallery? Is it not a formal gallery? Question about the tag experience. And I think that that's something that will always be a little bit of a struggle as long as the artist has as much say as they have now in the establishment of their own show. I think, and again, this is why I like rules, because if an artist has rules in place, I think you get a better product overall.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Very interesting.
I love this. Okay. All right. So now it is time to dive into your work.
Oh my goodness. This is going to be the longest episode ever.
Guarantee you, in like 2 minutes, it will be the longest episode. Yeah. And I love it because I've been so interested in everything you had to say that I'm just like...
This is the
hope
problem,
you're
though.
doing
I mean,
okay.
like, and we're getting to the worst place now because, like, if there's anything I could talk about forever, it is quite literally myself.
As you should be able to.
I mean, it's kind of why I'm an artist. It's why I went into public education, right? I was like, this is a captive audience. Those little kids
They have to listen to me.
Like, it is the rule.
That's why I've been podcasting.
Right?
You're listening.
I love it.
Okay, you have an upcoming show on May 11th.
I do. I have an upcoming show on May 11th. I'm going to do some shameless plugging.
Please.
So I have an upcoming show on May 11th. It's titled Pantheon. 4 of the works are in here in the gallery with us right now, just leaning against the wall. They're not framed yet. But the works are largely taking the forms that I've been playing with for the last couple of years, which are human forms. I've added in some women for this show, which is
I noticed that.
I was surprised.
I was very surprised when we saw these.
It turns out there are queer women stories in mythology too.
What?
I know, right? Who'd have thought?
I love it.
But I was surprised when we came up here and you pointed out on.
Yeah, the Inari there is on
Yes.
the end. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so that was your work. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow.
Thank you. Yeah, the 2 ladies there on the end. There's one more lady planned of the 8 figures that I want to include. All of them are gods who have queer stories associated with them, which is why I've fragmented the forms. I want to talk about that queer experience and the fragmenting. But also I like the idea that gods aren't ever wholly formed or understandable. I tend to think about a lot when I'm actually working on them, the idea of angels and cherubim and those type of mythic beings, right? Those anthropomorphic mythic beings, right? And whenever you actually go into the literature and read about them, they're always talked about in ways that can't be comprehended, like they're matrices or they're woven forms, or I think there's a description somewhere of the cherubim as balls made out of eyes and wings, right? And it's just a form of blinking eyes with wings, so, right? And like, holy crap, that's like crazy amazing, right? Like, and it's so far out of what you would think of the universe that gave us like stone castles and drawbridges and like Bronze Age stuff, right? Like, it's very like literal and visceral and blech, and yet they have these pieces that are like so crazy abstract. So those are the things I think about a lot. I think about the changing meaning of mythology and gods, and also how queer stories are hidden from us. So here you have Odin there, and it's
Can you explain the piece you're pointing at?
Yeah, so the piece I'm pointing at it's like a muscular dude with a beard, and his forms are all, like each is its own pattern. So the chest is like checks, and his stomach is made out of polka dots, and his fist is a different color polka dot. He's got glitter for his face, and his trunks. And he's flexing his muscles because he's Odin, right?
A floral
he's like,
background.
On a floral, yes. On a floral fabric background. It's just beautiful. Painted right on top of the fabric, and the fabric there is mounted.
And gold leaf hair.
He's got, yes, gold leaf wings for hair. I love it. He's just all sorts of like flash, right?
It's my favorite out of the series.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's the glitter, but he just like, I want him in my house.
I think it's the glitter. I really love the glitter. I'm happy.
You're in good company.
Yes. We love glitter.
Which I was laughing about the Tyler, like, poor Tyler, because this is how my boyfriend feels all the time. He's like, when I pull out glitter, like gold, like leafing metal foil, he's like, fine, at least it's not horrible, you can vacuum it up. When I pull out glitter, like, his attitude changes. And right now, because I have a piece that has glitter on it, there's glitter on everything.
Everything.
Of course.
If there's carpet in a space, there's glitter in that carpet.
Yeah. I'm telling you, we work in the same office, and after we did our photo shoot, I came in like 2 weeks later, and I'm looking at the ground in our hallway, and there's pink glitter, and I was like, oh no, someone's gonna figure out that was us. And, like, it's just on us.
It's just, it's life.
Yeah.
So with Odin, the queer story is that he was a practicer of magic, right? And magic in that Viking lore was a queer practice, and it involved homosexuality, homosexual acts, the tie of being a magician was very much linked with penetration, male penetration. And the fact that the father of the gods is the practitioner of this, I think is something that's really, really important for queer audiences to know, right? These are myths that belong to us just as much as they belong to the rest of the macro culture, and we just don't see them. And that's echoed in Orus, who's right next to him, made out of paper. Again, the same kind of fragmenting of the figures. So he's made out of Dungeons and Dragons papers.
Don't support that.
I like D&D. I'm married to a dungeon master.
His hip bones down there, they're cutouts of character sheets from my characters that I played when I was a teenager.
I can't handle this.
We're going to go to your show and Tyler's going to be like,
end
this
the
is my
podcast.
I think it's amazing.
So Orus and Set have a great collection of stories, and for those of you who don't know, these are the Egyptian gods. Orus is the one who brought his father Osiris back from the dead after Set killed his father and chopped him up into pieces and threw him into the Nile. And so Orus had all these adventures collecting the pieces of his father and putting him back together. Really visceral, gross story, right? Mm-hmm. Even better. And I didn't learn this till last year, which is how crazy it is to think about queer stories and queer mythology, right? I care about this, and I didn't learn about it until last year. So Orus and Set have a whole collection of stories where in Egyptian culture, it wasn't penetration that defined whether or not you were, what we would consider gay, right? Or homosexual or whatever. It was semen and where the semen ends up. And so they have this whole series of games where they're trying to trick each other into ingesting each other's semen. It is
no way.
It is one of my favorite things. Like when I read this myth,
fascinating,
right?
Yeah.
When I read this myth, I was blown away. So Orus finally wins out and poisons Set with his semen.
Oh my god!
During a dinner party that Set was holding while Set's doing Orus at one point trying to get his own semen into the other god, right? Like there's this whole massive looping of the penetration of the liquid, right?
Yeah.
Which I find incredibly fascinating. And then when you step back from all of them, right? And whether it's those two gods, and then also here represented are Shaitan in a female form and Inari also in a female form. And that Inari is Japanese goddess. Shaitan is a pre-Muslim goddess, and she's actually, they is a better way to say. Both of those gods appear in both gendered forms across their mythologies. All of them are gods of magic. And it turns out when you step back, all of the queer stories always tie back to things that are related with the otherworldly, which I find fascinating, and I feel like it makes us even more unicorny.
Yeah.
I'm a unicorn. You're a unicorn. We're all unicorns.
All magic users.
I
love this collection so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
I can't wait. I will be there on May 11th.
I'm very excited. The next 4 pieces will all be a little bit different, as these are a little bit different from each other, but they'll incorporate the same fragmenting and patterning of form. Excuse me.
It's lovely to see when you go back to your consistent that they're different, but they also have that connection to your past work as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that's really important for me. So you'll see both the piece with Inari and the piece with Odin. They have a telephone pole in them. And it ties back to when I started like 5 years ago really taking my seriously, I did a lot of landscapes. And the thing that interested me about California landscapes was the play of telephone poles on the landscape itself. Because to me, right, I love anything that has to do with communication, right? The way that we impart meaning. And a telephone pole itself, right, is this wonderful historical piece, right? Our history of how we communicate with each other. It's something that wasn't there in the landscape 100 years ago, and it probably won't be there in 100 years in our future. Like, it's our landscape. And to me, that's special, right? But it's thinking about how meaning is made, right? And I think it's even more compelling when you think about the telephone pole in a U.S. American puritanical context. It is a cross every few hundred feet on every road you're driving down. And I think that's really intentional.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then I love then putting crosses all over my gay
Yeah.
shit.
Micro.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes.
I just think your pieces have so much to say, and they're so interesting on all types of levels that your pieces are great. I love them so much. And I love the pattern work, the fabric, the gold leaf that
The
you
gold
Yes.
leaf so
I
long.
love the
It's
gold
so
leaf.
forever. And,
Well,
you know,
I
it was
love-
really wonderful to hear Andrew talk about gold leaf, because here's someone who's studied it, right? And I'll say I care about the correct application of metal foils. And we really shouldn't call it gold leaf because I'm not using gold, I'm using metal foil. Not using real gold. Which actually I'll say, like, had I done Shaitan there in real gold leaf, it would have changed the price point of materials from $20 to $150.
Yeah.
So it's not a giant jump. But I very purposefully did not want precious metals on these pieces. And the interesting thing about copper foil is it actually is copper.
Okay.
It's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
But silver foil is generally aluminum unless it's specifically declared real silver. And gold foil is typically a mix of copper and other materials, which is why it tarnishes and has to be polished. And that's why I was able to tarnish.
Tarnished it on
Yes.
purposefully.
Yes. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just say I love how earlier you broke down with abstract art.
Oh, sure.
And with your pieces, they have abstract elements.
Yes.
But the way you bring them back together, I love. Like, as someone who like would walk into a gallery, I wouldn't look at these and think abstract art. I would look at them and I'd want to take time to really stare at them and look for the meaning. They're just incredible pieces.
Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted something where even if you don't know mythology,
Yes.
even if you don't understand what I'm trying to convey about queer experience or queer theory, because that's like my mom says all the time, and it really informed. I think it's one of the best pieces of real criticism I've ever gotten. My mom said, "You're too smart." Right? And what she means by that is people don't understand what you're trying to say. You are overeducated. You overanalyze. You overthink about what you're making. And I love that about my work, right? And I feel naked when I put works out. I feel like if you stood there and stared at it long enough, you would know so much about my psyche, like psyche, right? Like not just like the secrets that I keep deleting out of my history on my web browser, right? Not those kind of things. I mean, like those deep, really dark, gross, nasty, like evil thoughts that we all actually have. You could read those in my work. That's just how I feel about it. But what it made me reflect on is that that's what I care about. But in order to be accessible, I also have to create something that's interesting and beautiful without that.
Yeah.
And that's why I like the patterns. That's why I like the materials so much, and why I like to mix the different mediums. I feel that when you get pieces like this where there's so much happening inside of the form, that they become their own curios, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like walking up to a cabinet filled with all these little great wonderful things to examine and articulate, right? But in this case, I'm doing it in a way that it's a single object put back together.
Yeah.
And that really was the idea, was how can I translate a curio cabinet into a painting, and encapsulate the idea of being God and being gay at the same time.
You did it. And I just think, just even individually, if I walked up to just one of these, and I would it's powerful. They're
Thank
each
you.
powerful.
Thank you.
I really love them.
Thank you.
I agree with you, Mom. You are way too smart. So my question for you is, when you present them in your show, I'm assuming you have an artist statement, but with the labels, do you go into the mythology of each
Or is it just their name?
So this will be a really interesting one for me, because 825 traditionally, as a gallery, and they very much display, like Peter, who's the gallery manager over there, and he manages the entire organization. He will not have a problem saying to me, cut this piece. This doesn't fit with the show. I want you to rethink this in here. Maybe have 2 or 3 less. Like the full expectation that he will have some input on how the show is hung. On top of that, they traditionally do not label works on the wall. They pin a number, and you have to go back to the pricing sheet.
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember this.
Yeah, and pricing sheets aren't my favorite model, because I feel like if you make any hindrance to the buy, you're making a hindrance to the buy.
Yeah.
So I don't love them, but neither Tag nor 825 have art dealing in their missions, right? So for 825 to say we're not going to label on the walls, it actually works for them. Or for a museum or an institution, perfectly acceptable. If you're a gallery whose main point is to drive sales, you're going to have the label right there with the price on it.
Yeah.
And here at Tag, the artists make that choice. Typically, they make it together, not always, but typically together, and it typically goes towards labels on the wall, because the artists have more of a vested interest in sales in this gallery than they would in, say, 825.
Okay.
Which is really like 825 is a much better springboard for gallery representation, a much better springboard for proving that you can put on a show so that you can do shows at other institutions. And other institutions will look at your 825 show.
Okay.
In fact, most people who have had solo shows at 825, the favorites that I've followed, I have then seen them exhibit those shows and other conceptual shows in major institutions all across the West Coast. One of my favorites showed his show there, and then immediately showed another show down the street here, and then immediately 2 months later showed a show in Denver.
Wow.
I mean, like boom, boom, boom. And it really, when I asked him, he said it tied back to 825.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So you don't have to go to art school to be successful in the art world.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, it does definitely help, right?
Yeah.
The thing that I see from a peerage that has an MFA, or a peerage that even just has a BFA, is that they know a lot more people.
Yeah.
Like way more people than I do. They have better connections than I do. They know about more art calls than I do. It's a really great way to be connected to what it means to be an artist in today's world. That's really what I see the benefit of education being. But I'd say that across all fields, right? Like the benefit to an Ivy League education is that you know who all the Ivy Leaguers are, right? And I see that among all of my peers now, right? And like if I were to reconsider my college experience, the only change I would make is I would have pushed harder for an Ivy League school or a West Coast top brand school rather than a state school. Not because I feel I would have gotten a better education. I actually don't. I think I got the best education. Like out of everyone I know, I think I got the best education at a state school because they cared about teaching me. But what I see all of my peerage who went to Ivy Leagues or who went to Berkeley or went to USC, right? The difference there is they have all the connections within the industries that they're working in to really make leadership changes, leadership jumps that I struggle a little bit more than they do. And that's not to say that I struggle, right? I still have a master's degree. And a manager job, manager level position for a major corporation. Soon to be co-president of an operational gallery. I mean, like I'm doing fine.
You're literally killing it.
And in shameless plugs,
yes,
I do want to add this one in since we're talking about my work. I have a series of works that it's older. Most of my work from 2015, 2016 was engaged on social justice. Lots of portraiture, lots of police violence issues. And one of my works, a painting that depicts the shooting of Walter Scott, is going to be reprinted in La Carrega o la Violencia de la Estat contra el Pueblo, or The Change, or the Violence Against the State Against People, at the Museum of Garacha in Girona, Spain.
Wow.
That's incredible.
So I get museum credit at the end of this
Oh
month.
my gosh. Congratulations.
And it will be on display celebrating a 100-year-old acquisition from Ramon Casas called The Charge through August.
Wow.
Yes.
That's amazing.
So international museum credit, patting myself on the back.
As you should. Well deserved. That's
Thank
amazing.
You. And again, like, really great because they're reprinting it, so I have literally no cost.
That is amazing.
I was like, not only do you have permission to reprint, you have permission to publicize, put it on all of your flyers.
Exactly.
Use it in social media, like anywhere you want. You don't even have to attribute me.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's amazing.
That's how I feel with my art. I'm like, whatever, just use it in whatever way you want.
Well, which is a really interesting thing, right? Because, and I find that, so you and I, we come from educated backgrounds, right? We also come from, a certain socioeconomic class. And so when we approach art, we approach it in this way that art belongs to everybody. And yes, I want you to use my art to make your own art, right?
Exactly.
And it's because to us, like the money and the finances behind art aren't necessarily the drivers, right? Mm-hmm. But I have found in my experience that those artists who don't come from an education background or a higher level socioeconomic background is that the ownership of ideas, right, becomes really, really important. And that's something I really struggle with those artists who have a different experience with ideas than I do, right? Because where I feel like we're riffing off each other, let's have fun, like I see artists playing with collage, I see artists playing with fabric, I see artists playing with metal foil, and I'm like, dude, that's awesome, let's go for it, right? And I'm like, follow. Whereas, other artists see me doing something and they'll say, well, but that was this guy's idea, or that's my idea. And my take on it is, well, yeah, of course it was. And now I'm riffing on it and doing something in my style on that idea. And it's kind of cool, right?
There's that amazing book, How to Steal Like an Artist. And it's so important because a lot of times you get to your own uniqueness or originality from stealing from other people to get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really, if we're not allowed to riff off of and play off of each other and really engage in visual dialogue, that's the way I like to think about it,
I like
right?
that a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
If we're not allowed to engage in visual dialogue back and forth, what's the point? Right? Like, if you create a work about Donald Trump and I have a reaction to it and create a work in the same style about Michelle Obama, and then another artist has a reaction to it and creates a work in a similar style about Ivanka, right? We've got this really interesting conversation happening in a visual sphere that I think then increases the whole dialogue that everybody's engaged in. But if you say, oh, that's stealing from me, cut it off, nope, then you've cut off the dialogue. You've cut off the potential for growth. One of the things we talk about in my professional world is that we're not actually competing with what you would consider our competitors. They're actually helping us grow the knowledge of our industry. Our competitors are actually a completely different field over there that are stealing the audience we could be collecting across our industry, right? So we don't look at it. I mean, we're the biggest fish in the pond. So we don't look at it as competition. We look at it as incremental growth for the entire industry. If you grow a little bit, we grow a little bit, right? Whereas we look over there to a different industry and we say, we need to make sure that we're growing against their growth. It's a different type of model. So I feel like with artists together, if we all agree that we're growing on each other, right? That there's no such thing as stealing. I mean, there is, but when you're doing things in your own way, it's not stealing. When you get an idea that sparks, or when somebody's work sparks an idea that informs a difference in your own work, that's not stealing. What's stealing is a direct copy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Call back to episode 1.
Okay.
The Ivanka Trump piece.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
What would someone say if I were to do that same piece here, but with Michelle Obama?
So
Look-alike.
I actually thought about that during the episode when you brought it up, because you had asked that question during the show. And I think that what you run into is when it's Ivanka, it becomes this idea about power and domesticity. When it's Michelle, it becomes about power, domesticity, and the historical context of slavery and servitude. And that's a completely different read on feminism, right? And I think that when you introduce powerful Black women into roles of subservience, you're really doing them a disservice. Whereas when you do the same thing with powerful women who are not of color, right, it's less of a harm to them, right? Because white women do not have the historical context of slavery. They were not forced to be servants. That's not true at certain socioeconomic levels. Yeah. But, I mean, again, we need to separate slavery, clear social wrong, from the overarching history of women's subservience, right? And that is definitely its own bubble. And that's what becomes problematic with a Michelle lookalike cleaning up after all of us.
I agree. Would it be considered stealing?
I don't think so.
Okay.
That's what I'm interested in. And for me, right, so I actually think about it in terms of math a lot. Because my 2017 work, all of that series, which the boys downstairs on display right now at Tag Gallery, they were all taken from the internet. All of the images that I used from that series were taken from the internet, largely from Reddits and Tumblrs, before Tumblr went prude on us. And I very much wanted to grab the idea of the queer social sharing, which is kind of what's going on with my Instagram right now too. So the pieces downstairs, they're all shared photographs, right? The provenance unknown. And I like the idea that some are vintage, some are new, some are essentially from pornography, some are from people's private collections. You just don't know really where these images are sourced from. But I did think very particularly about the math of them. And my rule was I didn't want the figure that I used to take up more than 80% of the total work of art.
Okay.
Or, sorry, more than 20%,
okay.
right?
That makes more sense.
So,
okay.
yes.
Yeah.
So that my physical task making, right, was 80% of the creation. And I felt that kept me very established in fair use mathematically.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
I tend to think about things in a math-like structure that way. It helps me organize both what I want to accomplish and where the boundaries are. So I did a lot of line figure outlines. Excuse me. I did a lot of line figure outlines. And the line itself is never more than 10% of the total piece, right?
Okay,
so
yeah.
even though it's the central subject, right, there may be a photograph underneath, and then I've drawn over, and those two photographs superimposed on each other. Those are my photographs. Okay. I've taken those. Yeah. It's my original artwork. I've done the line drawing of it, but that line drawing is based on something that was not my original work. Okay. But I feel like playing off of that original work allows me to then say something completely different about it. And when I take things like shared pornography and I start talking about the way that we interact with each other online in a visual way, it changes the context of art. And I love too then that you have something that's aesthetically pleasing, right? We know that guys are gonna like it because it's a hot dude.
I like it.
right. So, but at the same time, like if you stop to think about it, well, okay, why is the hot dude represented inside of his figure with a chain link fence? And then why is outside of him an open ocean scene? Yeah. Like what is Ryan the artist trying to say about how we encase ourselves and expose ourselves, right?
And I want to post a picture of this piece as well. The one downstairs that we're discussing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the writing on it.
Yeah, so that piece, the Communion Quad is the name of this piece. And it's 4 works on paper. They're ink paintings, and then I hand wrote, they're from 2 different kind of hodgepodge collections. One set of them is from queer porn commenting. Okay. And so it's things like, hey, hot body, I want to get with you, nice buns, and a little bit more graphic. To a lot more graphic. And then the other one, the other 2 pieces in that set they're taken from a news article. And I particularly, it's the major Denver newspaper. Okay. Denver Sun, maybe? No, that's Phoenix. It's whatever the major Denver paper is. So I went online and read the comments and used those from a few of their gay marriage political articles. And so you get a much different read of language when you're talking about a general audience in Colorado discussing gay marriage and how that's evil and awful. And I like the juxtaposition of, hey, sexy man, you deserve to die, right? Like, because that is the experience that I've had my whole life. I've literally, on one side, am considered a, beautiful, sexual, smart and intelligent being, right? Full of vibrancy and positivity. And then over here, there is a whole line of people who would happily, throw a rock at me. Mm-hmm. Because I live a different way.
And that's so powerful when you understand the concept behind that piece. Yeah. It's just heartbreaking almost.
Yeah, I mean, so I love, for me, and it's totally kind of my own way that like I get joy out of art, is I want to create things that are beautiful and critical. And that means that, you're looking at a beautiful object over there, but I'm saying something really, really nasty about it.
Well, and that's what, when we walked in and I saw it, I was like, oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
it was aesthetically pleasing. And when I walked up closer, I was reading the lines, I was so torn. I was like,
yeah.
What? And I could have stayed down there much longer looking at it, which I don't say that about a lot of pieces, to be honest. So.
I have a social justice piece, and I'll share it with you guys to put online. That's Blue Holocaust. It's probably my most successful piece, in that it has been shown a lot, both in reprints and in its original. It's still it still gets shown, and I made it in 2015.
Wow.
So for a piece of artwork to still get accepted to shows years later, really great. So it's 6 separate 20 by 20 watercolor portraits. 3 of them are blue, and those are of young black boys who have been killed by police in the United States within the last few years. Kamani Gray, Tamir Rice, and Deontay. Deontay Terrell Farrow. Thank you. Thank you. Nothing worse.
I gave you the look of, you need to remember this.
Yes, I do. Yes, the 3 of them. And then juxtaposed against them are 3 red watercolor portraits of Jewish and Romani boys who were rescued by U.S. American soldiers from the Holocaust. Wow. Yes, so these are all public domain images recreated in watercolor, which is why I get to do them. Not stealing.
Mathematics.
There you go. And then I wrote a bit of prose that really talks about the black boots. That becomes this recurring refrain. And it's when the black boots come during the night, when the black boots come into the neighborhood. And it's reflecting the black boots of the Nazis and the black boots of U.S. American police today. Am I saying police are Nazis? No. But what I am saying is that the Jewish Holocaust really has some true parallels to the Black Holocaust that has been occurring in the United States forever. That piece is called Blue Holocaust. It's very, very aggressive towards police. And I think police are wrong in a lot of instances when it comes to their interactions with Black communities. And that's what I'm calling out. It's a beautiful piece. I love to watch people when it's exhibited. The first time I showed it was in one of the beach communities a little further south. I won't name which one. But it was a beach community a little further south, not in LA County. And I really loved watching people because they were instantly drawn to it. It's beautiful. The colors are there, and the script is, it's my natural script. But when you get something so fine and close, right, you really want to get into it and read it. And when people got the message, which usually only took 20, 30 seconds, a lot of them walked away instantly.
Wow.
Like instantly walked away. It is a very aggressive piece. Really interestingly, when it showed in Paso Robles just a few months ago, back in January, people loved it. Loved it. So, a very different, much more liberal, arts-oriented community, and it was really one of the big talk about ones in the show. So yeah, I mean,
Wow.
and that's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Right? I don't feel that these guys are quite as literally hard. For like, I think you can walk away without ever getting the critical message in Pantheon or even in Mythologies, which was my September show. I'm much less in your face critical with these, much more subtly critical. But I think as soon as you start to ask yourself the question, why are the figures broken into different patterns? It begs the question, then what is the artist experience? And then when you ask, well, what is this artist's experience? Then who defines himself as the queer California artist, right? Then what does it mean to be queer? What does it mean to be queer in California, right? And when you think about, there's still this anxiety happening in one of the most liberal spaces in the world. It really kind of, and I'm privileged, right? Super privileged, like super privileged, right? Like fully aware. I operate in the top 10% privilege.
Yeah.
And I still have anxiety about all of that, right? Yeah. Again, I could talk forever.
I think it's
I love
fascinating.
it. I think so too. And I'm excited to see the Blue Holocaust pieces. I think it's just, that's got to be so incredible that even if they walk away, you affected someone.
Oh,
and that's powerful, and that's amazing.
It's when people hate something you've done. And I think you mentioned on that a couple of, it's better to have people talk negatively than not talk at all. No, totally.
Exactly.
Tear me to shreds.
Incredible.
Give me some type of reaction.
Yeah.
Right? Right? Make me cry a little. I don't even mind. I mean, I do in the moment, but tomorrow I won't.
Yeah. That's amazing.
I really want to talk about your Instagram.
Yes.
Because I'm fascinated. I love it so much.
Thank
like
you.
every time you will post something and I love it, and then I'll show my husband, who's a fan of your work.
Yes.
Thank you.
And he's like, I love this piece, and it's so great.
But he won't follow. Well, Tyler probably would, but most husbands would not.
Yeah. Tyler totally loved your piece. After you had a piece in it was the video show for Las Cenas.
Oh yeah.
And you had, I think, a tablet framed, and you had your piece in the tablet, and it was
it the fragmented voice?
They were changing.
Yeah. So I drew last year. Was it last year? Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Time flies.
So I drew 100 figures. Again, these were figures found online. And I patterned over the figures and then removed the figures digitally on an iPad. The entire set is created, and most of my Instagram post process is iPad. I use Sketches Pro, which has an iPad version and a desktop version. I think they're free, but the Pro version is $20 in each. Best $40 I ever spent. Best $40. I use it daily. Hugely informs my art practice.
We have comments.
So the figures, those figures are what defined this body of work. They were the start of fragmenting, and it really started with, I'm just playing with dudes and having fun. I'm just having fun with naked dudes, right? Drawing patterns over them and playing with just the effects behind it. And it turned out I loved it. Right?
So cool.
And it allowed me to very quickly practice. It allows me to practice drawing. It allows me to practice form. It allows me to practice color. It allows me to practice patterning. All of this in minutes, right? Which when you are not working electronically it's not that fast. It's messy. It takes up a lot of space, right? And all of this happens on my iPad. The bulk of those 100 figures I made on vacation in Europe. while,
That's
cool.
while cruising
Yeah.
the Mediterranean. I had downloaded a I was like, I'm going to draw all these guys.
This
And
is relaxing.
It was. And it was during that trip that I drew the first of the pattern, like figured out how the mapping would work and started really playing with the different forms and patterns. I found some new stencils. Yeah, and they just keep informing themselves. You know, the fabric was a new addition inspired by other artists that I know. The future of this upcoming show will include some wallpaper applied directly to the canvas, as well as other materials. I like the play of things. I like thinking of paint beyond the liquid material, right? Like painting with paper is kind of fun. And I love paper. Oh my gosh. I love paper. I love paper.
The fun thing about paper.
Let me tell you about paper. Tell us about paper.
And for me, there's so much joy in taking things that we interact with and really just making them a little bit different. So Instagram, oh my goodness. I told you I could talk forever. So my Instagram is crazy. For those of you who don't know, my Instagram is very me focused. I have taken the Oprah magazine kind of route, and every picture includes me.
Drop your handle.
It's at K Ryan Henisey. That's KRYANHENISEY. And same thing for my website, kryanhennessy.com. So my Instagram, it's all me, largely me missing articles of clothing. So I like to show off my thighs. They're good and they're pretty. Yeah. I like them. I have a shapely little bubble butt.
You have a very cute butt.
My favorites are the ones with your butt showing.
It's not just you. The like counts are much higher for those. I know what I'm doing. But it's really funny to me because a year ago I would never, like total against the rules. Oh my God, no. And I came from public ed where it's super, super conservative, like duper conservative. Yeah. I still am friends with teachers who will not post pictures with alcohol in the background with them. Like if there's a beer can on a table 10 feet behind them, they will not post a picture online. So that's the kind of background I'm coming from. But at the same time, I'm watching this whole world operate around me that is about queer social sharing. And I'm engaged in artwork that's about queer bodies. I'm engaged in artwork that's about queer bodies and queer social sharing, and I'm not participating. And then I started to really, not only was it about defining the conciseness of your body of work, but I find that artists also need to define their stance in the world as an artist, right? And so when I said, well, if you want to be the queer artist, if you want everybody to think of you as the brand of queer artist, right? Nationally and internationally, you have to engage in queer ways. And so I was like, okay, well, how did my heroes do that? How did Warhol do that? How did Mapplethorpe do that? How did Herring do that? And so I go and I look at all of them. How did Basquiat do that, right? All of them. And also reflect then on how do people outside of the art discipline, right? What did James Baldwin's work on what it means to be a Black writer deeply informs me and how I think about being a queer artist. Because, like he says, I will never be divorced from queerness. Not in the historical context I live in. Even 300 years from now, when they're studying us, right, they're going to look back and they're going to say, Ryan lived in a time of identity politics, and that was what ruled the American consciousness. Right? And so Ryan's work has to be defined in that queer context. So rather than fighting against that, I want to own it. And part of owning that is owning my body. And owning that sex sells, that being pretty sells, that showing off your body sells. And it does. I've made more in art sells since September when I showed my first butt picture.
Wow.
Than I've made my entire 5-year career that I've focused on fine art.
Incredible.
In September, when I really started to change this, and really like the focus, the definition of this didn't occur till November. So I'm playing September through November and then defined by November. But since September, the playing to defining and to now, I went from 700 followers just on my regular art engagement. And I'll say I've upped my engagement, my personal engagement game to others, which also is an influence. And now I'm over 2,400, right? Or just under 2,400 today. I think I'm doing about 100 new followers every week.
That's amazing.
And part of it is the extreme focus on how social media works, but a huge part of it is showing my ass. A huge part. I target my audience, and my audience is gay men. And understanding that I'm speaking about gay men context, that I want to sell art to gay men, like rather than targeting art collectors, I'm going to create a market of art collectors in my niche.
Which is brilliant.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I didn't come up with that idea. I heard it, but I stole it like an artist.
Hell yeah. So, one thing that I love that you're doing on your Instagram is, so you're not just
it's not just my butt. She's
not
right.
just dropping
It's not.
a booty thing.
There is art going on, yes.
And there's art behind you in a lot of the pictures.
And I'm playing, before you go to your question, let me ask you. I'm playing with the idea of taking these Instagram images and making those actual images the subject of my solo show for
That was
November.
her question. That was a question for me in the office, and I was like,
save it for the podcast. We have the worst conversations where I'm like, can I ask you a question? And I start. She goes, don't say it. We can't talk about this yet.
Save it for the podcast.
So I actually went to Catherine, and I was like, so I've been looking at Ryan's Instagram, and
all day long at work.
You're not wrong.
You're not wrong. And I was like,
ladies, you can follow me, please.
Yes.
It's not just for the boys.
It's not
I mean,
just for the boys.
But you're welcome.
But I was telling her, I was like, I feel like his individual Instagrams are art pieces. It's him with his art, but then these pops and
It's fine.
there's these pops and splashes of patterns and colors. And I was like, would this be considered pop surrealism? And she would not answer me. And she was like, just bring it up later. I was like, no, I don't want to look this dumb. Like, I don't understand. Like, this is just his fun thing. But I love what he's doing. And it's so much more than just a booty picture, than just a selfie. There's colors and statements.
Yeah.
And
I love pop surrealism.
And I could be using that incorrectly.
No, I think that's a really great way to describe it. I think of it as an extension of digital collage.
okay.
And so, because so much of my work is collage oriented,
Yes.
I see the overlaying of those, and I'm literally just drawing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, oh, I want that pattern, and I just steal that pattern and I trace the
Yeah.
pattern in my colors, or do little tiny flourishes or whatever.
And it's like you're collaging and layering
Yes,
your art with your picture, and then I love it. I think it's so cool.
Thank
Do
you.
the show.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've been thinking about it a lot. I did submit to a show recently with 3 of the pieces. They were not accepted. But I'm
not a curator. But I like it.
But I think there's something like ridiculously meta about the idea that like here's an art piece of an artist with an art piece that
Yes.
he made that he's then drawn even more shit over.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, well, if I can print those out large scale, could I also then apply more on top of that? So it's actually a physical piece of art on top of a digital piece of art. Like, right?
Yeah, you're layering. It's
meta. And it fits my favorite subject,
You.
Me.
Of course.
Okay. So that may be what appears in November.
Awesome.
But there's so much time between now and then I could change my mind.
I definitely think that there's something there.
I do too.
It's so
I really
interesting.
do.
And I think it's important, I'm sure you would agree, that like if you put a piece into a call for entry and it doesn't get accepted, does not mean that it's a bad piece.
Not at all.
And I think a lot of artists get discouraged that, oh, this isn't a piece that will ever be shown, and it really depends on the juror or the theme or the space. I think it would be amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really interested in kind of expanding on them, exploring them more. I like when I put parameters on them. So all of January was in white, right?
So rules.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
He loves rules.
Yeah.
You guys are polar
rules.
opposites.
But you also have those mornings where you're like, oh shit, I didn't do my drawing for Instagram last night. And there's 3 of them due every day, right? So it's not like it's a small art project. Because we hate ourselves. Yeah. Was my favorite line from Californication starring David Duchovny.
I love that show.
Love that show.
Love it.
So, it's like the last season, and there's that young kid trying to get with his daughter who wants to be a writer, and he says to the kid, why would you want to do that to yourself? Being a writer is just giving yourself homework for the rest of your life. And I was like, that's what I did.
It is. Have you seen Californication?
I have not.
Oh my god, you guys have to watch it. It's so good. It's if you like Breaking Bad, so you'll like it.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a very irreverent show about a writer who's just kind of a shitty person. But like an endearing shitty person.
But you love him, but it's funny.
It's Mulder, right?
It's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I like him anyways.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no, I mean it's great to watch.
Yeah.
And he's like the worst womanizer, so he's naked all the time.
But you're down with it. You're like, I'd let him womanize me.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
In fact, you're kind of like, I want to be him.
Yeah. It's really conflicted.
It's very just like Walter White.
Yes.
It's a real best character arc ever. All right, we've digressed.
We have. We're now to the TV segment. All right.
Should we do featured artists? Highlighted artists?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
So I picked the featured artist today. And the artist I picked is David Jester. He's a San Diego-based artist. And I picked him because I am really, really drawn to just the beauty and the vibrancy and the color in his work. He uses nude figures in a swimming pool. And one of the things that stands out for me and kind of echoes, right, my own patterning, but this is in the ripples of the pool, right, the painted ripples of the pool, is that distortion of the queer experience, right? And so when you look at one of David's paintings, you can tell that the figure, it's very obviously in a pool, it's underwater, but nothing's right crystal clear. It's like you would expect it to be looking underwater. And I think that that's David's way of saying, this is the experience I've had operating in the world around me. Nothing's quite clear. Everything's a little bit distorted. Still beautiful, but a little bit harder to read or to understand. And the thing that I think really makes David stand out is that clear, unique, concise, and argumentative stance, right? He's clear in that his subject is crystal clear. You know that these are dudes in a pool. He's unique in that he's doing something with color, with the feel of California, right? Which you said something about palm trees a couple episodes ago. Literally, if it's a picture of a California sunset with a palm tree, I want it.
Same. I need it. I love you.
Ridiculous.
You're my new art expert. She shamed me.
No,
I
was
stand
so
by
funny.
my shame.
It was so funny when you did because I was like, yeah, no, that's everything. But David's also concise. All of his works are about a naked figure in a pool, right? A nude male figure in a pool. And he's argumentative in the way that he paints, right? By using a very painterly style, by using those vibrant, bright colors, and then by choosing a subject that's purposefully distorted, he's asking us to think about the queer experience, to think about what it means to be defined as male or HIV positive or gay or sissy or fat or Twinkie, right? All of these different words that we hear, different labels that we hear. I think he challenges those. David Jester can be found at David M. Jester, that's DavidMJestr.com, or at Surejest, Surejest 1121, or at David M. Jester, which is his collaboration page. The at David M. Jester page is pretty fun. It has he has asked writers to write poetry or stories inspired by the works that he's painted, and those collaborations are really fun and interesting experiences in their own right.
I love that.
David's exhibited internationally in galleries, fairs, and competitions. He has works on display in Norway, in Santa Barbara, in San Diego, and I believe in Florida today.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
He's really amazing.
Yeah.
And he won first place recently in Metro Source Magazine's World Trade Center competition last year.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was a big cash prize and museum placement.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We will be sure to share at least one of his images and tag all of these.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's just a total favorite. I've met him a couple times. We've spoken on the phone a couple times.
Awesome.
I love what he has to say about his art, what he has to say about the queer experience. All of us artists are interesting, quirky characters, and he certainly fits that bill. And he's got a good brain for what he's doing, got a good brain for marketing what he's doing. And I think that when he finishes this series, he has a set goal that he wants to make. I think that if he really focuses on the connections that he has built in his own life, we could see a lot of things out of this. Books, documentary. I think there's a real space for his story. I just, like, every time he's here in Los Angeles, I run to go see an artwork.
That's incredible. Let us know.
Absolutely.
Too, and we will come with you. Yeah, absolutely.
I think his work is amazing as far as him taking ownership of the male body, because I think that's rare in artwork. You don't usually have nude males.
Yeah.
And it's a barrier to showing.
Imagine.
There are some galleries that literally will not show a penis, period, end of conversation. You will never see a nude male form in a number of galleries and in a number of local Los Angeles galleries.
Wow.
And what I love about the men in the pool is there's pieces where he has, 3 men in the pool, and they're not, it looks like I don't know how to describe this, but it's not overly sexualized. It's not like pornographic. It's men in a pool who obviously have a relationship that are enjoying each other's company in the best type of way.
Yeah, they speak to that type of body innocence that I really think we've lost in the way we interact with each other today. Is that something we can lay at the feet of pornography? Maybe a little bit. Is it something we can lay at the feet of just gender interactions? Absolutely. But also I think it's something that speaks to our own history. We're really bad at sex, like as a people. We're uncomfortable talking about it. We're uncomfortable having it be a subject of discourse. We're still today working through, hey, powerful men, you should not hit on women that work for you.
Yeah.
Still working through that today. live in the city of West Hollywood, and any of you who are interested in public scandals, go check out the 2019 mayoral discussions. Because even amongst the boys, we need to have conversations about when it's right and when it's not. Yeah, but there is something. My boyfriend has mentioned a few times that there is something missing in today's interactions in queer culture. And he defines it as a loss of that sexual innocence. That now we're sexualized with purpose rather than sexualized with innocence. And there are all those great masters pieces of young men bathing in pools, young men bathing on the river, young men bathing in the sea, right? I mean, like, the list goes on and on of young men bathing throughout history. And we don't get too much of that anymore because we go straight to the instant gratification of pornography. But I think, David keeps with some strict rules just as I do. There are no erect penises. It really helps to define, like I can point to all of my work and say, it's not sexual or erotic work because no one's aroused. Mm-hmm. Right? These are just figures.
It's the male form.
Exactly. Yeah. And it becomes a very different animal. And I've had a number of commissions of the erect form. Guys like it. Sure, I'll make it for you. I'm not going to share that on Instagram.
Interesting. It's interesting that you've had commissions requesting that.
Yeah. And I approach them with, do you really want a piece that's aggressive?
Yeah.
But queer erotic art is its own niche. I mean, it's a big, and has masters, right? Tom of Finland is a definition of what it means to be a queer artist, right? To sit over here and only mention on my snobby box, which I did earlier, right? Only mention the established ones, even though I included Maplethorpe, but only to mention and not to really talk about Tom of Finland, right? Or even, I mean, I would argue that what some of the major pornography directors have done for queer pornography has been creative, right? Chi LaRue is has really created something special and different in queer erotic pornography that didn't exist before. She took things to a really graphic and different place, and the boys liked it. Yeah. I think that when it comes to art, right, we can't look at something like that and say it doesn't belong in the art context, because it certainly does. It's part of the human experience, and if that's how I'm defining art, then I can't exclude anything. But I do think what we can do is define the types of art and lanes that we want to be in, right? And so you can have Tom of Finland over here, who's on the edge, and then you have Chi LaRue, who's clearly in pornography. And then you have someone like David Jester or I, who's way over here in fine art. Interestingly, my male figures typically... well, not typically. I have had 3 disclaimers posted next to my art in exhibitions, and once at a major institution.
Really?
Yeah. As in, this is the adult section.
Wow.
And they're just nude figures. Yeah.
And that doesn't really happen for the female form.
No.
At all.
No, not, and never.
Yeah.
You can have naked, you can have breasts, and you can have, not graphic. Genitals. I think once you get into the actual flowering of the genitals, then it becomes a little bit different. And that's when you enter really into great feminist spaces. Yeah. I mean, some of my favorite feminist works are just vagina. I mean, come on. Georgia O'Keeffe was like, it's amazing. How can you not love it? I'm a gay man and I love it. I'm like, look at it. It's a big giant flower.
I have comments.
Do you know Georgia?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I'm circling back.
So the dining room at my sorority in college, all Georgia O'Keeffe
No.
works. And we would like, the sorority would be like, we can't have anyone in here. Why? Sorry, we weren't very art focused. We were just like,
Well, no, I mean,
y'all.
young women surrounded by that kind of art, no.
No, it was not the move. So we'd all be at dinner
like
like,
you're all having formal dinner.
yeah, exactly. Formal dinners like, can we please? Like, I know she's like our honorary member, but
Over your friend's shoulder is an orchid.
yes. Oh man, yeah.
Oh,
That's
man, I
amazing.
love that.
She holds a special place in my heart.
Well, that's, I think David's amazing.
Yes.
His ability to. I don't give enough credit to artists because I'm so conceptually driven most of the time, but his technique is amazing. It's impeccable.
Yeah.
Because dealing with water and reflection and the figure is difficult.
Yeah, and what doesn't come across on Instagram is the size of them. They're actually quite substantial paintings.
Really?
They really are. His painterly style is so beautiful because when you get up close to them, you can see the underpainting behind each of the colors, right? In between, like the little tiny lines in between all of those ripples show the underpainting so you can see the layering. Ugh, I love it, right? Like, because that's the thing about like contemporary art today is photorealism. People still do it, but it's not the big fine art focus anymore because of photography, because of film. We just don't need it. And so it's dying away a little bit. But what we do find that is interesting in the fine art painting section is showing your work. Right? It's like being in school for math again. If you show how you got there, right? Which is why I like to show the underpieces of the painting. Why I'm not precious about the line or any of those things. I want you to see that it's made with paint and with paper and with fabric, and I want you to know
A human
how
made it.
Yes,
Yes.
right? Absolutely. And that really comes across in person with David's work. So not only are they the beautiful images that you can clearly see online, but they're also masterfully made beautiful images.
That's amazing.
Well, I
feel
look
like I've
forward
learned so much.
to seeing his paintings in person
Yeah,
one day.
same.
Like, he's definitely on my list
Yeah.
of artists
Yes,
that I need to see.
and I would say if you are looking for art to collect, this is a really, really great investment at this time because his price points are in the couple of $1,000 range. We're talking like, I think $2,500 to $5,000 depending on the size of the piece. Don't quote me on that. I think it's around that. But when you think about a piece of work that you're going to put in your living room that's going to exist there for the rest of your life, a $5,000 investment, what you paid for your couch, is appropriate. Mm-hmm. And especially when it's taken the artist 3 weeks, like solid weeks, to make. It's really appropriate. And at that size, I mean, like, if I had an extra $3,000 to spend, I would have one in my living room right now.
I think that's the hardest thing being an artist because when you get to know other artists, you really want their piece but then you also have those call for entries that you have, and you have your solo shows and your material, so it's.
Yes, my artwork takes priority over all
does.
others.
There.
Yes, I've chosen to spend that $3,000.
Yes.
On myself.
Yes.
But if I had an additional,
yes.
that I was told I needed to buy artwork with.
Well, and really, I mean, that is, it's actually a good point. If you want to be a collector, it's good to start thinking about budgeting for your collections, right? And if you are an artist and it's important that you want to collect other artworks, one, start asking about trade in kind. Lots of artists do it. I do it, but not all do. I'm a big fan because that means that I get something amazing, and we all feel good about the trade.
Can you explain trading kind of a little bit?
So trading in kind is when two artists say, I love your work, you take one of my pieces, I'll take one of yours. And it's finding that kind of comfort place. I see it a lot on Instagram. A lot of the queer Instagram artists, there's a whole community, and they, like, literally we all just paint pictures of each other. I'm like, oh, I love your style, do a self-portrait of me. And they're like, I love your style too, do a self-portrait of me. Okay.
That's amazing.
You know, there's nothing we love more than selfies. So I see a lot of that. I do a lot of it digitally. Again, it's just a very easy, cost-effective practice for me. And I can do a lot of them, so it's a good value for someone. And a digital work from me costs, if you just want something that's a social sharing size, so under 5 megabytes, $25. If you want something that's like, that you can print on a poster size, like 2x3, or maybe a little bit larger, 4x6, that I'll sell you for $50. And then you go and print on your own in whatever material you want to and enjoy. And I have a number of commissions have been done at that very, very low price point. I feel great about it. It's something that I can do in an hour. And I feel that is equivalent to the hour that I would have spent at work. Mm-hmm. So to me, I'm pleased as an artist to do that. I'm ecstatic when somebody says, well, you know, I'd really like you to do a commission in the style that you did that big wall painting in. And I can charge a couple $1,000s in commission instead. Always better. Oh, yeah. But it also takes 2 or 3 weeks for a work to get finished. You know, there's a lot more material that goes into it. And when I think about pricing, I think about a couple of things. I think about largely the size of the work. I go back to math, mm-hmm. And I like a formula. I typically do around 85 cents a square inch for across all mediums.
Wow.
Yeah. And that goes back to, I had some very early training in stained glass. Mm-hmm. And because that's a craft, it's very much controlled by the square inch price point. So it was something I understood. Whereas I feel like when you try to... So I'm prolific. I work pretty fast. So if I were to base things off of time, I'd never make any money. Never.
Yeah.
I'm too fast. And that's not fair to me, right? That I have a technical skill and speed. That means that it undercuts the value. I don't think so. So I base the value on size of materials. And the 85-cent price point is a really good, comfortable price point for me. I feel I get a good return. Typically what that means, I add in the frame. Mm-hmm. So it's that plus whatever the framing is. But I typically don't charge a percentage on the frames. I just, because I'm making the choice and, you know, whatever. I just consider that a neutral cost. But a piece like these, they'll be around $1,800 to $2,100.
What are the size of these?
These are 3x4s.
3x4s.
Yeah. So 36 by 48 inches.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you find that people are drawn more to larger pieces or smaller? I always love larger pieces, but I don't know if I am odd in that way.
I think people, I think people respond to pieces. Mm-hmm. But then I think people respond to, when people are out purposefully buying art to fill their home, they care about the wall space. Mm-hmm. And that defines what they're looking for. So if you have an area that you know is smaller, you're going to look for smaller pieces. If you have an area that's larger, you'll look for larger pieces. That's just the way I think about art consumption from your everyday consumer. Your art collector who buys art for the sake of buying art, they will buy the art and then fit it into their collection later. Mm-hmm. I actually had the real privilege, one of my pieces from last year's show was purchased at its second exhibit. And they invited me to their home a few months later. So a beautiful home in the mountains above Paso Robles, behind 2 gates, longer than a mile driveway, sculpture garden, home by a famous Mexican architect. Right? It just keeps adding up as I'm like pulling up in my little Honda and I'm like, am I in the right place? Yeah. And their take on art, and they've been collecting their whole lives, is they love art. They've always worked closely with art and artists and galleries. And it's just something that's always been a part of their lives. And they said, we love to buy art when it's something that strikes us as beautiful, engaging, and fits in a price point we can afford, right? And so that piece was under $2,000. My takeaway from that was $1,000, which is nice. It was a 40% cut to the gallery it was exhibited at. And I purposely price points for that, and I purposefully keep all of my prices standard for that, just as you guys mentioned in the last episode. So what you'll
Fist
see,
pump in the air.
Exactly.
Very passionate.
What you'll see on my website is that is the cost of the artwork, the local, state, and city taxes. And the cost of shipping is my total price that's listed online for US and Canada. If it's international, it'll add more once you check out. And those prices stay exactly the same if a piece goes into the gallery, and I remove the piece from my website when it's online, when it's in the gallery space, because the gallery owns the rights to sell it. And if I were to sell it under them, right, the expectations become muddy.
Yeah.
And rather than deal with that, I just separate them out. So the boys downstairs are not displayed on my website right now, even though they've been in the current Instagram cycle. Yeah. Because they're here. But yes, so that price point remains the same. Basically, the gallery costs are what I eat in taxes and shipping.
Okay.
Which I don't have to cover when it's in the gallery, because the gallery is the taxable institution in that case. I don't pay sales tax when the gallery has sold it. I just collect my commission.
Well, that is, I think, such an important point.
Yeah, it's a
I
great
love that
example and explanation of best practices.
Yes. And that is, number one, consistent pricing is a best practice. And I don't do like sales, like you won't see a 20% off on my Instagram. Not gonna happen. Sorry, everyone.
Art shouldn't be on sale.
No.
Even I know that.
And when you create things like that, then you create an expectation in the buyer that they'll wait for your next sale. Right? Like, I really want that piece. I'll just wait a year until he has his spring sale or his studio sale or whatever it is. And they'll wait. And, you know, the way that businesses get around them is that they inflate their prices, right? So the reason Black Friday works is because the prices aren't actually a sale price. The rest of the year, it's just way up higher than it should be.
Exactly.
Or really the 2 months prior, it's just way up higher than it should be.
Well, that's what I love about like people who love outlets.
Yeah.
They're like, but it's such a great deal. I was like, but it's lower quality goods.
Yeah.
It's not the same textiles.
Yes. Not quite as consistent.
You're buying a completely different product.
You're buying a private label.
Yes.
Absolutely. Of the brand.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we are literally 2 hours and a
Oh
half
my
in.
gosh.
Oh my god.
So
double hours. But this was amazing.
It was so amazing.
You have my permission to cut it in half.
We are not going to
There's
cut
0% chance. Anything, we're going to need to have you back on.
Fabulous.
Yes.
I love the idea. I mean, like, literally love the idea of this show so much. I'm happy to rejoin you again. I think it's smart the way you've set it up. I love how easy, I love how quick you guys have been going about. I mean, you're just like, oh, we had this idea. Here, Ada.
We go hard.
But it's also, I think you're right in that there really wasn't anything like this out there. I did see someone like reached out to me on Instagram with a follow that they're going to do something. I don't know if it'll be similar, but it's an art-focused podcast as well. And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's been like, because I care about art, because I care about the art discussion, it's so nice to have something to listen to and to react to while I'm commuting or while I'm taking a walk. That's on a subject I care about, and I'm learning things. Andrew's episode was great. It was so good. Phil's episode, the idea about creative education. Duh.
Yeah. He's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, he was great.
But yeah, so happy to come back. Maybe next time we'll bring a timer.
No
rules.
Put down.
Thank you so much,
Yes,
Ryan.
thank you. And for those of you, I think we said this at the beginning, but maybe not. We're on Spotify now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is
Doing
awesome.
big things.
Follow us on Instagram at Art World Podcast. Or if you're looking for more information, like from episode 1, go to
theartworldpodcast.com.
yes. And we will have everything from chronological order down. We're on Twitter.
Yes.
And what else? That's it?
That's it.
And review and
Subscribe.
Mash
that 5-star button.
Mash it.
And you 3-star, I'm still waiting for your review. I want to know why. Give me an honest critique.
I went and looked, and it's like 1 3-star.
I just want to know why. Help me improve. That's all I want in life, guys. All right. Well, thank you. And
Thank
we
you.
love you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.